Hello, and welcome to another of our lockdown live streams. This evening, we're delighted to be talking to Josh Hamilton. Josh Hamilton runs the website, thegist.co.uk, which is an independent resource for political analysis and journalism. Please do go and check it out. There's a huge amount of content there, a huge amount of his own interviews, actually. Josh is also author of the upcoming book, Brexit, the Establishment Civil War, which we're going to be talking about because it covers a lot of the issues that we've been concerned about over the past couple of years. So welcome, Josh.
Hi, thanks for having me on the show. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
I've never had an intro.
Well, I hope that was okay. I hope that it was accurate. Okay, so I wanted to start off with some of the topics that you cover in the book, which we've sort of discussed a lot ourselves. And one of those is the Brexit vote and the role of social media, in particular Facebook, I suppose. They're the biggest player here. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you to say something about that, really, about the kind of structure of Facebook as a product, as a company, why it's vulnerable to these kind of attacks from nefarious agents, but is Facebook a threat to democracy, and if so, why?
Okay, well, that's obviously a very simple question. But to give you my best shot at it, I would basically say that the biggest thing that I don't think people consider, that most of the time that they're spent on social media, is that they are the product. And it's not something new that I'm saying, but it's something that I just think people miss, is that every single moment that we spend on social media, and that can be for some people like up to 2, 3, 4 hours a day, every moment is being tracked. Every click, every like, every page we follow and unfollow. And it builds up at such a phenomenally huge resource of data about how we react to things. And it's about being able to pull us in and make us want to click on things that we're going to buy. Essentially, it's just a way of understanding how to sell us a product. And that is all that Facebook is doing. If they say that they're there to connect everyone, and it's there to create online communities and bring everyone closer together. And ultimately, the reality is that the way that the algorithms work and design our news feeds just pushes us further and further towards things that we are already likely to click on. It's just giving us a curated diet of exactly what we want to see. Yeah. And the way that the newsfeed is designed as a kind of lottery of content triggers our brains in the same way that, for example, our brains react when we're sitting at a slot machine. It's that random, not unknown of how you don't know exactly what's going to pop up, what article, what fun picture, what meme, what video. That's the thing that keeps us pulled in. And all it is pulling us into is, again, our data being sold. And it's a pretty scary thing when you then take all of those skills and that power of political advertising on Facebook and all of the information that they can amass as to how to sell us something, and then turn it on the political sphere, especially when we really don't have any grasp on how effective this sort of advertising is, how pervasive it was in trying to turn people's vote during the Brexit vote, and then in the subsequent elections in 2017 and 2019, and it will continue to do into the future because we just allow political advertising on Facebook with virtually no oversight. So that would be essentially my summary of why Facebook is a problem for politics.
Okay. All right. Thank you. No, that's good. So I guess a follow-up question is, well, I mentioned you were going to create a clone of Facebook, but you wanted to create something slightly less awful or less dangerous and more ethical. What I'm wondering is how much of this is sort of inevitable? Because if you build a social media company like that, really the only way to fund it is from advertising, right? And it needs to be a large enterprise. So it's probably going to be a public company. It's going to be a listed company. So you're going to be answerable to shareholders. So essentially you have an obligation to make decisions that maximize profits. And we know now that content that's divisive is better in terms of getting engagement and attracting attention and ultimately driving clicks through ads. So I suppose what I'm asking is it that Facebook's awful, or is it just that social media is intrinsically awful? Could anyone do a better job?
I mean, I personally feel that social media is attempting to replicate a lot of the social interactions that we have day to day. That's what it was sold as. It's building our in-person communities online.
Yeah.
But social media and the way that just technology works, you do not get the same rich experience that you get from a social interaction face to face as you do from a screen or a computer. So I would very much be of the opinion that it is not possible to have a social media company that is intrinsically good, because it's already like taking so much from our human experience as such, without bringing and giving us anything back that seems worth the amount of time and lack of sort of human interaction that it sucks from our day-to-day life. It's something that Cal Newport, he's a fantastic author. He wrote Deep Work and Digital Minimalism. And he kind of talks about whether, if you had to put a value on Facebook, how much is it actually worth? Like, what does it bring to us that we couldn't just live without? And I feel like it's a pretty like prescient question, but that doesn't mean that we have to get rid of it, because, for example, when people brought in television, when that first became something that was then in every home throughout the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, everyone had a television then, or then it became two televisions or a color television, but it was a new piece of technology. And people eventually moved to then say, okay, in the UK, at least anyway, in America, they are a different story. But in the UK, we decided that political advertising on TV just wasn't something that we were going to accept, that it just wasn't a good idea. We thought it was, for whatever reason, dangerous, not worth the time, because ultimately it becomes a function of, if you can pay for the airtime, you get far more exposure. And that's the reason that we have the sets of laws during election time that dictates how much coverage both political parties should get, and we just took a step as society, as a country, to say this is something we're not going to allow. And advertising on social media is like getting a TV ad and putting it on steroids.
Yeah,
you can reach anyone almost on the planet at this point with a targeted political advert. And when targeted adverts started to come in around 2014, then we saw the amount of money that was being spent on online advertising go through the roof. And I don't think that money is being spent in vain. I don't think that there is millions and millions being thrown at digital advertising for nothing. So I feel like if we're going to say we have created these social media sites and they are now too huge and too pervasive in our lives that we will not get rid of them entirely. There's talk of like, how do you break up some of the big tech companies with antitrust laws or whatever. But the reality is that this technology is now here and social media is here. And I think what we have to say is that ultimately, I believe we should just ban all political advertising online. We said it was all banned on TV. I don't think we should have it on social media whatsoever. I think that there is almost no scope for oversight unless Facebook or the government are willing to hire thousands of moderators to go through the thousands and thousands and thousands of variations of tiny ads. And that's what that really becomes scary, is that adverts, they're not just that you can be targeted with one ad for, say 10,000 people who they believe should be targeted by this particular type of ad.
Yeah.
So Facebook categorizes you based on your likes, and they can put you in categories like a stoic traditionalist. There's loads of fantastic category names for them, which you could read about in my book. I'll give a plug, obviously. But it's essentially, I think the adverts then are going out, and you could be targeting just tiny little variations in people, and the ability to then look at all of the tiny little variations and look at which ones were the most effective. Say that there was a slightly different way the graphic was presented or a different color. I mean, Google A/B tested like 47 different shades of greens and blues for their Gmail account. Like, really, if Google are willing to just play around with that, if you really, 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 really want Britain to leave the EU, you're going to put way more time and effort into trying to figure out what is the exact way to present something to someone. And the Leave campaign were able to pay for 1 billion ad impressions. Mm-hmm. For me, that's just too big a number for it to be negligible in its impact.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So maybe that is the answer then. Just
I mean, we're talking about Facebook, but it's like they are not the only. They are not this really awful like single entity that's getting away with things like this. It's something that the amount of data that's being sucked out of every little interaction we have with anything online is so huge. Like, for example, if you were to search on the site dictionary.com for the term depression, there's a chance that site could install up to 223 trackers and cookies on your computer just because you've searched for the word depression, and it's gonna be for companies trying to sell you antidepressants.
Yeah.
And there's so many countless examples of really just predatorial behavior that sucks on our worst fears and instincts and hatred to then sell us something. And the sad reality is now in the 21st century that is becoming politics more and more and more online.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and what you said earlier about the nature of the interactions that we have online, that they're kind of flattened and lacking in genuine human contact, lacking in compassion, that I think is a major issue. So I wanted to move on to some of the people who have abused that. Oh, by the way, if anybody has questions for Josh, I completely forgot to say that. Please put them in the chat, and we'll see if we can get to those. So yeah, so there is this aspect that it's easier, I guess, to do this kind of targeted advertising, targeted messaging as a way of appealing to people's worst instincts, right? So the people involved in that, in Brexit, the kind of well-known actors being Cambridge Analytica, obviously, SCL as this kind of umbrella organization, IQ, this kind of loose network of companies. I wanted to ask a bit about that and how that fits into the kind of broader picture in the UK of these other aspects of corruption, I suppose, kind of dark money, think tanks that aren't think tanks, politicians selling access for depressingly small amounts of money. So I suppose what I'm asking is, how does corruption, this is a depressing question, but there you go. How does corruption work in the UK and how bad is it?
It's funny. Peter Geoghegan, who writes for Open Democracy, whose book Dark Money just came out. I did an interview with him. He talked to me about how he feels that the UK is actually more open to abuse and corruption because of the cheap prices that you can get for, for 50 grand, they'll get you, lunch with Boris Johnson, or it would have, I know, a few years ago. I'm not sure if it would still will, but that's not a lot of money. Like 50 grand wouldn't get you anything in America. It might get you a seat at a fundraiser for someone running for Congress. Like that would be it. So he's actually really concerned about how open the British system is to abuse. But I guess the SCL question and the Cambridge Analytica sort of web, as you put it, is a really great illustration of just how easy it is to use webs of companies and different shell companies and just interconnecting subcontractors to obscure where money is coming from, where money is going, who the real owners are, tax like beyond any amounts of belief. There's the tax structure of some of the companies in the UK are ridiculous. There's 20 different companies that ship things offshore through 10 different tax havens as lawyers and accountants take their little fees out, but none of that's ending up in the hands of the tax man.
Yeah.
But corruption as such in the UK is something that I talked about in the book, in terms of there's a difference between people being genuinely corrupt and someone, for example, taking a bribe. If you can imagine perhaps like a younger Boris Johnson sitting across the table from someone who says, yeah, so you're going to push some free ports when you are running to become prime minister, because, we like the idea of setting up in a tax-free, regulation-free zone, our factory right by the port as a little nice sort of Singapore-esque offshore tax haven for Europe that some people have suggested that Britain might need to become in order to survive post-Brexit. And there's a difference between someone offering him money for that and say his belief in free markets and capital. The decisions that can often look like people are genuinely just corrupt and handing it off to their best friends. For example, and there's been, a handful of different scandals regarding contracts for coronavirus-related pieces of outsourcing for masks and whatnot.
Yeah.
But the general overarching wisdom of the elite as such in Britain, especially in the upper echelons of the Conservative Party, is that privatization and outsourcing is always better. It's not that they're getting handouts for it. It's that they just believe ideologically that the free market will solve all of your problems. That you can just throw money at the free market and that COVID will just go away, or that Britain will suddenly become one of the most prosperous economies in the world just because we've been freed from that mighty, awful European red tape that's holding Europe back so much that it's still one of the centers of world productivity and has been Europe is, people like to talk about Europe's decline in the world, but it's not like Europe is in a period of degrowth or decline. It's that the developing world is catching up in terms of GDP sizes, is how it's often looked at. That doesn't mean that Europe is becoming a really awful, declining place that's falling apart at the seams. There's still like steady economic growth going on through it. In fact, the UK is trailing, like since the Brexit vote, has been one of the lowest, one of the countries with the lowest growth in the European 28. So
always GDP is a problem because the UK is so big. So we always have this thing of, we're the X biggest economy in the world, but per capita, it's not that great, really.
Per capita, it's not fantastic. But what's even worse, I think, is when you consider the level of income inequality that we have in Britain, and wealth inequality. We might have one of the largest GDP sizes in the world. I think we're fifth or sixth, depending on how exactly you measure it or when it's been taken from. But that's just a really bad metric of how the economy is doing and how people day to day are getting on. And honestly, I think this is one of the things that we have to be incredibly wary of post-Brexit, is that we're going to hear a lot of words like GDP growth and about how the economy is going to be growing. And honestly, that's not going to be put back into the pockets of the average person on the street. The people who are going to benefit from the red tape fire that is being proposed are the City of London. and the financial markets and all of the capital that's sitting there that can, then therefore invest, move around nice and freely, even with even fewer restrictions than we already have, because it's not like we have a seriously stringent set of capital controls at all, or any sort of or banking regulations, some sort of financial transaction tax, or anything to sort of inhibit the power of global capital, especially in the city of London as the center of basically money in the world. That's not going to go away post Brexit either. So I think that the arguments for people trying to say that we need to have, cut all these regulations in order to keep people in London and keep these businesses there is a false equivalency, because it is the financial center of the world, and unless they start making massive changes to how we regulate finance in London, they're not going to go anywhere. If anything, we're probably going to end up, if we cut regulations in the way that have been suggested, we're probably going to end up with an even larger concentration of finance in our economy. And Nicholas Shaxson, who wrote the Finance Currents, essentially argues that has been such a drain on the economy that it is equivalent to the resource curse that afflicts many developing nations, that all of their entire economy ends up geared towards oil or copper or some sort of mineral. And he essentially argues that finance has done that to Britain, and that it's sucked talent and money and investment out of every other industry in the country. And I think the figure that he quotes is that finance has cost the British economy £4.5 trillion, which is such it's an unfathomably huge figure. But that's only, in my opinion, going to get worse post Brexit, unless we basically stand up and say that's not how we want our country to be run after. But at the minute, as I sort of put forward in the book, I feel that neoliberalism has essentially given us three waves of consolidation of the power of corporate entities over the past sort of 30 or 40 years, starting with Thatcher, then moving on through Blair and Brown, and then in 2010 with the Cameron Osborne government. And you could potentially just continue that sort of era up to now. And I feel that what is coming post Brexit is the next wave of that consolidation that's going to further lower regulations, further lower corporate tax rates, top rate taxes, and the justification for everything is going to be economic growth. And it's ultimately just going to put more and more and more money in the hands of the very richest already. Yeah.
I can see that as a legitimate anxiety. But I mean, so think about neoliberalism under Thatcher, Blair, Brown, Cameron. I think I sort of naively saw the Blair and Brown years as a sort of benign version, because public spending did increase. NHS, schools, universities, research all did relatively well, albeit through vehicles like PFI. But is that a sort of ideal case of neoliberalism? I mean, is that as good as we can get, I suppose? Is what I'm wondering.
I mean, neoliberalism is a difficult concept to really try and understand how to tackle it, because it's become so pervasive in our culture, and it's such an all-encompassing term that people kind of I don't know, it gets thrown about a lot as well. I know I'm very sort of guilty of that, but it's very much focused on it's just the idea that the market knows best, that it was essentially comes from Milton Friedman. A lot of people look at as the father of neoliberalism, and his essential argument was that every sort of regulation that you put in place is a hindrance to the market and economic growth. And in order to ensure the strongest economy and the best economic performance, that essentially you had to wipe all of the regulations from the slate, that just everything had to go. That was and if there is, if say you start to make some really big cuts in your public services, you start to sell off a lot of state assets, cut back on state spending, regulations start to come down, taxes start to come down, as happened, for example, in Chile through beginning with Pinochet in the 1970s. That the prescription is always more neoliberalism. If it doesn't work, it's because you didn't cut hard enough. If the economy doesn't grow because of these, say you cut corporate taxes from 50 to 20%, and you cut down a whole bunch of employment regulations, and for some reason that doesn't do great with the average worker on the street. That doesn't put more money in their pockets. Then. And the economy doesn't, this magical, wonderful, beautiful free market economy doesn't materialize. Then the next prescription is, it's because you didn't do enough cuts. If you didn't cut it enough, there's still too many regulations holding us back, and that has become the ideology that as I said, is the dominant one in the upper echelons of both the Conservative and the Labour Party, unfortunately. As you mentioned, Blair and Brown, as much as they did expand social spending, and they were constrained from going too far right by the who were then the rebellious backbenchers of Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell in their party. They still were very much married to the idea that the corporate world was the one that was going to provide all the best parts of economic growth. That there was the private finance initiatives are just the perfect example. That there is no justification for something costing 5 times as much just because you want it to go through private industry, and yet that's what's happened for tens of billions of pounds worth of public infrastructure projects.
I mean, I think their argument was that it's not a great argument, but I think their other argument was, well, how else are we going to raise the money?
Yeah.
In terms of what we can sell to the public.
I would be very much of the opinion that if you just explained how it worked to the public, that they would be happy to borrow that money instead of just have it sort of sitting off the books costing 5 times as much.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, it's kind of the governmental political equivalent of those payday loan companies that end up charging you astronomical APR rates. Yeah.
But I mean, one thing that's interesting is really the whole of Northern Europe is like a sort of counterexample to all of this, isn't it? There's kind of this belief that essentially intervention, central government intervention in any way in the market, in any sense, is guaranteed to have a negative impact on growth or whatever. I mean, Germany, Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, they all seem to be quite strong counterexamples. I do wonder whether part of the appeal of reducing ties with Europe is just that, just having less this visible, obvious counterexample right on your doorstep, countries actually doing quite well with much more regulated economies than ours.
I mean, I'm very much of the opinion that post Brexit, we may be leaving the EU, and we might be signing all these wonderful trade agreements with other countries around the world they're obviously going to pump untold riches into our economy. But we will never leave Europe. We are there. It is right there. They are our closest neighbor. They have been our largest trading partner for the entirety of the history of Britain. And I can't see that changing anytime soon. Like ironically, there's a book called "Making a Success of Brexit." It's by Roger Bootle, who's an author or a writer for the Telegraph, and it's often held up as this wonderful example of why Brexit is going to be fantastic. That there's nothing to worry about, and that even in the case of a World Trade Organization no deal, hard Brexit. Yeah. That we are heading very, very rapidly towards, that it'll all be fine, that there's no need to worry because, common sense will keep the trade rolling, and that there's no way that there will be heavy tariffs imposed between Europe and Britain. And he quite gleefully puts forward the idea of just zero tariffs. If we were to do that with the EU, we would then be forced to do that with every other country in the world, and we would be imposing zero import tariffs on anything.
Yeah,
which is kind of concerning for if you're a British small business that is producing goods that you feel are going to probably be outdone by very cheap goods coming from South America or China or anywhere in the developing world that has horrendous conditions for workers and things cost pennies to produce.
Yes.
But ultimately, the impression that I got from reading his book was that, of course, Europe is going to stay as our biggest trading partner. And there is no way that things are going to get so bad between the UK and the EU that will cease to be the case. So I'm not such a, I probably wouldn't say that the desire to leave Europe is the desire to kind of get away from other economies. But you definitely got a point in that Britain is a kind of special example in that we're kind of trapped in a way between like the ideals of Europe and America, and we're unfortunately drifting more the US direction at the minute, especially with the style of politics that we take part in. Our political system in first past the post kind of exacerbates that. I feel it sort of creates a more sort of partisan sort of binary one versus the other two-party system that most of Europe doesn't actually have. They're all very much proportional representation systems. But shout out to my homeland, who has the most representative electoral system in Europe, in Northern Ireland, with our PRSTV. It's if anyone from England has ever seen a Northern Irish ballot, we get a big list of all of the candidates standing in our constituency, and we have to fill it out 1 to 21 or however many candidates there are is our choices of preferences.
Oh wow, I did not know that. Okay. I
mean, you don't have to fill them all out. You're trying. Some people will just go in and pick the first few and think they don't care. But
right, okay.
A good citizen will fill out all 21.
Right. Okay, nice.
But I don't really remember what your question was.
Well, it was just really about this kind of embarrassing example of all these other successful European states doing well by not having this kind of horrible race to the bottom. We are sort of running out of time here. I want to ask just one more question. Okay. So your book comes out in February, right?
February, yes. It was meant to be coming out around now, but COVID meant it all got delayed a little. But
okay. So does this mean that the text is finalized, right? I guess?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. All finalized.
I mean, it must be quite difficult because, given that politics is like happening on a daily basis now, you must be thinking, oh my God, I wish, if only I could add one more chapter. So I wanted to ask, think about events between when you actually finish writing the book and now, including like today, what's going on sort of right now. If you could add one more chapter to summarize what you think is important about what's happened, in the immediate past, what would that chapter cover, do you think?
It's a good question. I mean, there was always a fear, especially with something like this, that just, there's new developments every day. And at some point I kind of had to go, right, okay, this is the point at which I'm saying, here's all the examples I will give up to. And then everything after that is just after that, and hopefully I've not made a fool of myself. I mean, the point that I actually end my book with is discussing the idea that Naomi Klein had put forward in the shock doctrine, that essentially the history of the last 40 years of the world can be boiled down to a series of shocks to different countries, be that civil wars, natural disasters, economic shocks, coups, changes of regime, just anything that leaves like a mass traumatic impact on a society, and how that has then been used to consolidate further and further the neoliberalism as an idea and as an ideology around the world. And she essentially compares the shocks and the subsequent rush to make fast reforms to the reaction that victims of electroshock therapy torture ended up going through in people who were captured and tortured in Chile, or even just people who were lifted off the streets of America and tortured under MK Ultra. And essentially, she argues that this shock always has to come before these mass changes. And the point that I made in my book was that we have a shock coming, that be it Brexit, a hard Brexit, be it the economic consequences of whatever happens there, because it's going to be a bumpy ride. Like, even if we're all right in the long term, strap yourselves in, folks.
Exactly.
So whether it is that was the economic fallout, whether it's the fallout from the next wave of sort of neoliberalist policies that we are probably going to end up trying to implement, or whether it's something completely different, that we have a big shock coming, and that will be used to push forward, as I said, the next wave of neoliberalism in Britain. And I have somehow managed to, by not defining what that shock was, come out looking all right, because I think that COVID is that shock in a more massive way than I could have ever envisioned. Yeah. And I spoke about this with you before we started, is that COVID plus Brexit gives me so much more room for optimism. I have not been so positive and enthusiastic and optimistic about the future of our country for a long time.
Please explain.
Because now this is my working theory, that the lockdown in itself, not the pandemic, because the pandemic is something different. The lockdown has given us all this just pause, this moment where all of normal life, as we call it, I mean, there's a lot of people who have suggested it was not normal, but normal life as we have come to know it just ceased to exist. And it will. There was a point at which the pandemic and the lockdown went from this like kind of funny thing that we're going to tell our kids about. And, the memes doing the rounds about, we'll be able to tell our kids, we stayed inside for, a whole month. You can miss this one party tonight. And it went from being that kind of thing to something that is just permeated and will have a profound and lasting effect on every single aspect of our lives. I literally cannot even envision what life looks like after this. But I'll tell you one thing, it is not going to be the same. And that gives us the most beautiful opportunity in the world to take leaving the EU and the chance to rewrite all of our trade deals, all of our laws surrounding capital control, surrounding state aid, surrounding how we are going to deal with climate change. And all of these things that had to be addressed that were just sort of talked about, but caught up in the middle of just day-to-day life. And that pause and that fact that we now have to go back, rebuild, and reimagine how our lives are going to be gives me, cause for optimism that things might still be all right. Maybe.
Okay. Well, that's quite inspirational, I think. Jenny, do we have any questions on Facebook at all? We have a quick check.
We have one more question. It's a pity. It was kind of nice to end up on a positive note, but I'll just ask this question anyway. It's just, you're talking about lack of regulation. I'm just wondering, I'm thinking back to, the subprime market in America and the crash of 2008. Do you think that, people in the ERG and that, you think that they learned nothing from 2008? I mean, it seems like they're just heading to make the same mistakes again.
I mean, 2008 was an odd one because normally huge things like that, for example, back in the 1930s when there was a similar depression, have brought about much more stringent regulation and big changes in how we view, say, bankers. And after 2008, okay, bankers were for a while, the most hated people in Britain, but they didn't really suffer any consequences. Like, one person went to jail And especially in London, London kind of gets away with their culpability for the financial crash of 2008, because London inspired the financial regulation race to the bottom, and all of the problems and all of the products that were being sold in America, the subprime mortgage. The subprime mortgages, the collateralized debt obligations, the synthetic CDOs. I mean, is all of those were coming straight out of London. And when big banks couldn't get accountancy firms to write up positive reports or mechanisms for how they wanted to structure pieces of debt or different financial instruments, they couldn't get someone in New York to do it. They flew straight to London, and they had zero problems with trying to get anyone to justify the thing. So London is a lot more culpable. And honestly, I think that probably the answer is no. They haven't learned anything, because there was nothing to learn. Like they did exactly what they wanted to do. They took huge risks, made stupid amounts of money, made stupid amounts on their bonuses, created huge profits for their clients, and then they just walked away. There was no consequences for the people who caused the crash. So there was nothing for them to learn. They're doing exactly what neoliberalism and the kind of hegemony of finance is encouraging and tells them to do.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that seems exactly fair and accurate summary. I think probably. I think we are really out of time, aren't we? Looks like we're out of time. Well, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting, and I think people watching will have found that really interesting as well. So I was thinking back. We interviewed Peter Jukes a while ago, and he also kind of ended on a similar kind of optimistic note that one thing that's happened is that recent events have just essentially shown what's broken, so we know what to fix. Which I'm sort of taking as a point of optimism and a point of inspiration.
Yeah, we definitely should. If we're all hopeless and pessimistic, then there is no chance for things to change. We have to be hopeful that things can be done.
Exactly. Indeed. Excellent. Well, we'll join you in that sentiment, and thank you very much for your time. That was brilliant. Thank you.
Not a problem. Thanks very much.